Hey guys, tonight we begin with one of the most quietly fascinating parts of the medieval mind, their strange and sometimes eerie beliefs about sleep. For them, night was never just the absence of day. It was a time filled with mysteries, spirits, dangers, and hidden rituals. Sleep was not a simple act of rest, it was a journey, a place where the soul might wander, where demons might visit, and where dreams were messages from beyond. Some of these beliefs feel oddly familiar, and some are so strange that they almost sound like the plot of an old folk tale. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's listening, somewhere out there in the dark. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's step quietly into a medieval night and explore the strange, beautiful and unsettling things they believed about sleep. The sun is sinking low, casting a pale golden light across the fields. The last hours of daylight in a medieval village are never hurried, but they have a quiet purpose to them. The air is cooler now, heavy with the smell of wood smoke and damp earth. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolls vespers that evening. Call to prayer, its sound rolling across the fields, like a reminder that the day is ending and the night will soon claim the world. Imagine yourself walking down the single muddy road that winds through the centre of a small medieval hamlet. The ground is uneven beneath your feet, scattered with small stones and the prints of cartwheels from earlier in the day. Most of the villagers have already retreated to their homes. Wooden shutters are being pulled closed. The faint sound of a cow lowing drifts from a nearby byre, followed by the muffled voices of someone finishing the last of the evening chores. Even the dogs seem to bark less as darkness approaches, as if they too understand that this is no longer the time for noise. There is a deep stillness in this moment, a stillness modern life rarely allows us to experience. It is not the silence of an empty place, but the quiet of many people all preparing for the same thing, the slow, inevitable arrival of night. You can feel the weight of it as the last sunlight bleeds from the sky and the first stars tremble into view. This is not the bright electric lit night we know today. There are no street lamps, no glow of distant cities on the horizon. When the sun goes down here, the dark is almost complete. Step closer to one of the cottages. The roof is low and thatched with straw, still warm from the heat of the day. Inside, you can hear a fire crackling in the central hearth, its glow spilling weakly through the small cracks in the shutters. The smell of smoke mixes with the scent of wool and damp rushes on the floor. A family is gathered here, eating the last of their pottage, a thick soup of grains and vegetables before settling down for the night. Their voices are low, almost drowsy already, as if the coming night has made them speak more softly. You notice that as the fire dies down, the shadows grow bolder. They move slowly across the walls, distorting the shapes of tools and baskets hanging on the pegs. In the corner, a child glances nervously at one such shadow before curling closer to his mother. Night brings a certain unease in this time and place, not only because it is dark, but because of what the dark might hold. People believed that night was the time when the world was at its most dangerous, when thieves and wolves and wandering spirits were free to move. It is almost easy to understand why they thought so. Imagine yourself stepping outside now. The village road is deserted, the cottages little more than lumps of blackness under the moon. The air smells of cooling earth and smoke. You can hear your own footsteps, and perhaps the faint rustle of something an animal, the wind in the hedgerow. There is no other sound. The stars above are so clear, but they do not make the darkness feel less. They only remind you how very small this little village is in the great sweep of the night. People in the Middle Ages often imagined that the world at night belonged to other forces not always friendly to humankind. The night was when witches were said to gather and cast spells, when fairies might steal into homes to swap a baby for a changeling, when restless spirits wandered seeking prayers or revenge. For many, it was safer to remain inside after dark, to close the shutters tightly, to say a short prayer before bed, asking for protection. A few might even hang small charms near the door or sprinkle salt across the threshold, a silent barrier to keep mischief at bay. Inside, the family prepares their sleeping space. There is no separate bedroom in most cottages, only a single room that serves for cooking, eating, and sleeping. The bed is little more than a wooden frame stuffed with straw and covered with a rough linen sheet. It creaks when the family climbs in, the parents taking one side, the children the other. In some homes, servants or grandparents might sleep on benches or on pallets of straw near the hearth. Sleeping close together is a necessity. It keeps everyone warmer through the night, but it also feels comforting, a small defense against the darkness outside. As they settle, the only light comes from the fire, which now glows rather than burns. It throws a dim, orange-red light across the room, barely enough to see by. If the fire dies completely, they will be left in near total darkness until morning. Most people try to bank the fire carefully, covering it with ashes so that it would smoulder through the night and be ready to flare up again at dawn. But if the fire went out, relighting it was a troublesome chore, sometimes even requiring a visit to a neighbour's hearth to borrow a spark. In this half-light, the world feels softer. The edges of the furniture blur. The shapes of people lying in bed become indistinct. Sleep seems to rise up like a tide, slow and steady, carrying everyone away into its depths. Outside, the village is now utterly silent. The only sounds are the chirp of crickets, the distant hoot of an owl, and perhaps the occasional far-off howl of a wolf. In these moments, the line between waking and sleeping feels thin, as though you might slip from one into the other without noticing. It is easy to see why people might have thought strange things could happen in their sleep. When you live in such deep darkness, the mind fills it with shapes and whispers. Dreams can feel like visitations, and the sounds of the night can become omens. Medieval people often spoke of hearing voices or music in their sleep, sometimes believing these were angels or demons trying to speak to them. They believed the soul could wander during sleep, leaving the body vulnerable to harm. This is why some whispered a prayer before closing their eyes, asking God to guard their body until morning. Occasionally, someone might wake in the middle of the night and step outside for a moment. Perhaps the fire had gone out, or they heard something in the yard. The night air would be cold and wet with dew. The stars would be so bright that it might almost feel as if you were the only person alive in the whole world. Some found this hour peaceful, a moment for quiet prayer or reflection. Others found it unsettling, as though unseen eyes were watching from the darkness beyond the hedgerows. As the hours pass, the village seems to hold its breath. Night stretches long in this world. In winter, it might last 14 hours or more. People slept, woke for a time, then slept again, their lives shaped by the slow rhythm of darkness and light. To lie awake in the middle of the night was not unusual. It was a time to think, to tell stories softly, to listen to the sounds of the world and wonder what might be moving in the woods beyond. And yet, there is a certain beauty in this world, a gentleness to its darkness. There are no clocks, no screens, no distractions. The night is something to surrender to, not to fight against. The stars overhead are not just distant points of light but companions, their slow journey across the sky marking the hours until dawn. Somewhere a rooster stirs early, and the first faint grey light begins to touch the horizon. Another day will come soon, but for now, the medieval village sleeps, dreaming its strange dreams. The world is quiet, waiting, suspended between night and morning. And as you imagine this scene, the stillness, the creaking bed, the faint red glow of the fire. Perhaps you feel yourself grow quieter too. It is easy, in this dark and gentle hour, to let the mind drift, to let the body sink into its own rest, knowing that you, too, will wake to the light again. The night in the medieval world was rarely one unbroken stretch of slumber. To us, sleep is a single block of time, a long passage we travel through without pause. But for much of human history, sleep was divided into two distinct acts, what people called the first sleep and the second sleep. This pattern was so common that it hardly needed explaining in its day. People simply understood that you went to bed soon after nightfall, slept for several hours, woke for a time, and then went back to bed for the rest of the night. It was as natural to them as the rising and setting of the Sunday. Imagine yourself lying on a straw mattress in a quiet cottage. The fire has been banked carefully under ashes, and the room glows with only a faint warmth. The first sleep has taken hold of everyone. You hear slow breathing, the creak of the bed as someone shifts, the occasional sigh from a child curled close to the wall. Outside, the night is very still. Even the dogs are silent now. This first sleep might last 4 or 5 hours, carrying the household well into the middle of the night. Then, at some point, perhaps near midnight, perhaps a little later, you stir and open your eyes. There is no alarm clock, no bell. You simply wake because it is time. The room is dark but not frightening. You can see the faint glow of the fire's embers, and the pale light of the moon slipping through a crack in the shutters. This is the hour between sleeps, a quiet, liminal space that belongs to no one and nothing. You are neither fully awake nor fully asleep, and yet it feels like the most natural time to rise. In this strange, still hour, many different things might happen. Some families might talk softly, exchanging a few words about the day or whispering prayers. A mother might check on the baby and add a little straw to the mattress. A father might get up and gently stir the fire back to life, so the house will stay warm until morning. Others might use the time to step outside and relieve themselves, gazing up at the stars before coming back to bed. But not all of this waking time was practical. Some people saw it as an almost magical hour, a time when thoughts flowed differently and the mind seemed clearer. There are records of people using the period between sleeps to read, to think, or even to write. Monks sometimes rose to chant their midnight prayers. In more secular households, it might be a moment for private reflection or hushed conversation. Some doctors even advised couples that this was the best time to conceive children, when the body was rested but not yet fully overcome by slumber. Step outside with me for a moment in this hour. The village is asleep, but not silent. Somewhere you can hear the low sound of a cow shifting in its stall. A few cottages show a faint glow where someone has stirred the fire. The moon is high, flooding the world with a soft silver light. Your breath, clouds in the cold air, and the ground is slick with dew. You might stand there a few moments just to feel the night around you, its quiet, its depth, its endless patience. This waking time was not always peaceful, of course. Some believed it was a dangerous hour. Witches were said to be most active at midnight, flying through the skies or gathering in secret places. Spirits of the dead might wander then, seeking prayers from the living. People sometimes told stories of hearing strange sounds at this hour, music, or whispers, or the call of a voice they recognized but could not see. In some villages, if you heard your name called in the middle of the night and no one was there, it was considered a bad omen, a warning that death was near. Inside, the household might quietly protect itself from these unseen dangers. A charm of iron might be hung near the bed. A cross might be traced in the ashes over the fire. Some even believed that sleeping in a certain direction kept nightmares away. In a time when much of life felt fragile and unpredictable, these small rituals gave a sense of safety before slipping back into dreams. There is a curious intimacy to this waking period. It is as though the entire world has paused, and only you are aware of it. You might speak softly with someone lying near you, sharing thoughts that would never come in the bright light of day, or you might simply lie awake, listening to the house creak and the wind sigh at the shutter. The minutes pass slowly, unhurried. Eventually, drowsiness begins to pull at you again. The fire has been coaxed back to a glow, the air feels warmer, and you turn back onto your side. The second sleep is often said to be deeper and more dream-filled than the first. Perhaps because the body is already partly rested, the mind is freer to wander. Medieval dream books sometimes advised interpreting dreams differently, depending on whether they came in the first or the second sleep. Dreams of the second sleep were thought more likely to carry meaning, to predict the future, to reveal truths, or to warn of dangers. To wake from a second sleep with a vivid dream was to carry something important into the daylight hours. It is easy to see why this pattern of sleep might feel more natural in a world without artificial light. The night was long, and the body, guided only by firelight and moonlight, followed its own rhythm. The space between sleeps gave people time to engage with the night itself, to reflect, to be still. Today we are used to 8 uninterrupted hours, but perhaps something is lost in that efficiency. Perhaps there is something deeply human about waking in the night and lying quietly for a time, listening to the slow breathing of the world. As dawn draws closer, the second sleep begins to end. Outside, the first birds stir in the hedgerows. The sky is turning the colour of pale milk. Someone stirs the fire again, this time to start the day's cooking. The household slowly rises. They do not leap from bed, but stretch, sit for a time, adjust to the light. It is morning now, but the memory of the night lingers, its quiet hours, its strange thoughts, its 2 gentle halves of sleep that carried them safely from sunset to sunrise. Even now, when most of us have lost this habit, there are those who sometimes wake in the night for no reason. They lie still, watching the ceiling, letting their thoughts wander. It may be that some small part of us remembers what it was like to live by firelight, to sleep in 2 acts, to wake at midnight and sit for a time in the gentle dark. And perhaps, if we let it, that memory can still soothe us, even as we drift back into our own second sleep. When the last light of the sun finally sinks beyond the horizon, the medieval world enters a darkness that is almost impossible for us to imagine. In our age, there is always a glow somewhere, a street lamp, a passing car, the faint spill of light from a window left open through the night. But in the medieval countryside, there was no such thing. The darkness was not simply an absence of light. It was a presence all its own, deep, heavy and complete, pressing against the windows, filling every space the fire did not reach. Step outside on such a night. The village is gone. The road you walked on during the day is gone. The fields, the church tower, the hedges that border the path, all have been swallowed up by a vast blackness that stretches in every direction. The only sounds are your own footsteps and the faint whisper of wind moving through the grass. You hold a rushlight or a tallow candle, but it seems to light only a very small circle around you, leaving everything beyond that circle mysterious and perhaps a little threatening. Darkness was not simply inconvenient in the medieval mind, it was dangerous. People believed that night was a time when the rules of the world shifted, when the boundaries between the natural and the supernatural grew thin. Thieves and outlaws might roam, yes, but so too might wandering spirits. It was said that ghosts could be heard, calling in the still hours after midnight, asking the living to pray for their souls. Strange lights seen in the distance might be the lanterns of travellers, or they might be willow, the wisps, mischievous spirits who lured the unwary off the path. Even the sounds of the night could feel like a threat. The howling of wolves in the distance, the scream of a fox, or the creak of a tree in the wind might all take on a sinister meaning. People told stories of hearing their names whispered from the darkness, a sound that meant death was near. In some regions, villagers believed that if you heard the cry of a certain bird at night, an owl, perhaps it was an omen that someone nearby would soon die. These beliefs were not just idle superstitions. They shaped how people behaved after dark. Most people did not go out at night unless they absolutely had to. Travel was dangerous, roads were hard to follow, and there were no lamps to guide the way. If someone needed to go to another village after sundown, they might carry a lantern and walk quickly, reciting prayers under their breath until they reached their destination. In some towns, there were curfews that rang from church bells, a signal for everyone to be inside and the fires to be banked. The very word curfew comes from the French couvre-feu, meaning cover the fire. Once the bell rang, shutters were closed, doors barred, and the outside world was left to whatever moved under the stars. Inside, the battle against darkness continued. People lit candles or rushlights, thin reeds dipped in fat, but they gave only a weak and flickering light. The fire in the hearth was the main source of comfort, its glow reaching into the corners of the room, casting shadows that swayed and shifted like living things. It was common to sit near the fire until it was time for bed, talking quietly, mending clothes, or simply staring into the flames. The fire was warmth, yes, but it was also safety. Its light pushed back the night, but fire brought its own worries. A house fire could be disastrous, so it had to be carefully controlled. Before sleeping, the embers would be banked, covered with ash, to keep them smouldering but not blazing. Some families used a fire cover, a metal or ceramic lid placed over the flames to choke them down. This was not just a practical act, it had a ritual quality to it. Saying goodnight to the fire was like closing the house against the dark. The embers were still alive, hidden under their ash blanket, waiting to be woken when the first person rose in the morning. There were also charms and prayers meant to protect a household through the night. A cross might be drawn in the ashes over the hearth, or a small piece of iron placed under the bed to ward off spirits. Some people sprinkled holy water at the doorway, or hung sprigs of certain herbs that were thought to repel witches and demons. These small acts were a way of saying to the darkness, "You may rule the night outside, but you will not cross this threshold." Still, there was an odd intimacy to living so close to darkness. Imagine lying in bed, the room quiet except for the faint hiss of the banked fire. Your eyes begin to adjust, and you can see the faint outlines of the rafters, the glimmer of a pot on the shelf. The darkness is deep, yes, but it is not empty. It has a presence, almost like a personality. It watches as you drift towards sleep. It holds your dreams. It keeps its secrets until morning. Sometimes, darkness revealed more than it hid. In the absence of light, the mind noticed other things. The smell of the rushes on the floor, the sound of mice moving in the walls, the faint shift of a body nearby. These small sensations became magnified, filling the imagination with possibilities. People sometimes believed they could sense spirits passing through the house or feel the weight of an unseen visitor sitting on the bed. Today, we might call this sleep paralysis, but for a medieval sleeper, it was a sign that something uncanny had entered the room. And yet, despite these fears, there was something almost sacred about the night. Priests and monks rose to say the midnight office, a prayer that recognized the holiness of the dark hours. Some lay people prayed quietly in their beds, whispering a pater noster before closing their eyes again. The night was a time for reflection, for silence, for the kind of thoughts that rarely come in daylight. It was a time when the ordinary world seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the light to return. Little by little, as the hours passed, the darkness changed character. Around midnight, it was at its deepest, almost oppressive. But as dawn approached, the black began to thin. First the stars seemed to fade, Then the sky turned a paler shade of grey. A rooster crowed. Somewhere, a dog barked. The village began to stir. And with that first faint light, the fears of the night dissolved like mist. The world was returned to its ordinary shape, safe again for another day. There is something oddly comforting in this rhythm, the surrender to darkness, the slow passing of the night, the relief at the coming of dawn. For medieval people, it was not simply a daily routine, but a cycle of death and rebirth. Each night they gave themselves over to the darkness, trusting they would wake again. Each morning was a small resurrection. In a way, the darkness made the light more precious, and the fire on the hearth more dear. And perhaps, if we think about it long enough, it makes the night itself a little less frightening. To sit quietly in the dark, with only a small light to guide us, is to experience the world as our ancestors did, to feel its weight, its stillness, its quiet strangeness. And in that stillness, we might discover that the darkness is not just something to fear, but something that holds us, like a blanket, until it is time to wake again. Step softly now, for we are about to enter the medieval bedroom, if it can be called that. For many, there was no separate room for sleeping at all. The bed might be little more than a corner of the main hall, tucked away near the hearth where it would stay warm through the night. In grander houses, there might be a chamber set apart for sleeping, reached by a narrow wooden stair or tucked behind a heavy curtain. But whether humble or rich, a medieval bed was more than just a place to lie down. It was a small, enclosed world, a shelter within a shelter, a place where life's most private moments unfolded. Imagine approaching the bed by firelight. Its shape is bulky, the frame wooden, perhaps carved with simple patterns. If it belongs to a wealthy household, it may be quite large and surprisingly tall, standing well off the floor so that it must be climbed into. The mattress, stuffed with straw, feathers, or even wool, is deep and soft. Over it lies a coverlet, maybe brightly dyed, maybe patched and faded from years of use. There may be sheets of rough linen, warmed a little by the fire before bedtime. In some homes, the bed is draped with curtains, a canopy overhead creating a sense of privacy and perhaps protection. Drawing the bed curtains at night is a little ceremony. Pulling them closed shuts out the chill and the drafts, and also closes out the rest of the household, turning the bed into a small chamber of its own. In poorer cottages, things are simpler but no less intimate. The bed might be a low frame near the wall, or a simple pile of straw spread on the floor, refreshed every so often with new rushes. The smell of fresh straw was said to be sweet and pleasant, a small luxury for those who had few others. Families might all sleep in one space, parents, children, even the occasional visitor, all sharing the warmth of a single room. Some slept on benches or chests, others on pallets rolled out at night and tucked away during the day. It was not unusual for servants to sleep near their masters, or for farm animals to be kept in the same building, their body heat helping to keep the air a little warmer. Beds were rarely empty. This was a world before central heating, and warmth was precious. Couples slept together not only for comfort but for survival in the coldest months. Children might be brought into bed to share the heat, creating a tangle of limbs under the covers. This closeness might seem strange to us now, accustomed as we are to privacy and personal space, but for them it was entirely natural. Nighttime was not only a time for rest, but for conversation, quiet storytelling, whispered prayers. In the darkness, with the fire a faint glow and the curtains drawn, the family became closer, their voices soft so as not to wake those already asleep. But the bed was also a place of vulnerability. Sleep was a time when one could not defend oneself, when spirits, or so it was thought, might creep in and do mischief. To keep safe, some households placed protective objects near the bed. Iron was considered powerful against evil, so a small iron tool or key might be kept under the pillow. Certain herbs like street, John's wort or rosemary could be tucked under the mattress to ward off nightmares. In some regions, a piece of bread or salt was placed near the head of the bed, both everyday items believed to confuse or repel malevolent spirits. There was also a curious belief that where the bed was placed could affect one's health and luck. Some people insisted that the head of the bed must face east, toward the rising sun, a position thought to bring good dreams and blessings. Others avoided placing a bed so that the sleeper's feet pointed directly toward the door, as this was said to mimic the position of a corpse being carried out for burial. The way you slept, even the direction you faced, was not just a matter of comfort but of cosmic significance. And then there were the dreams themselves. For medieval people, dreams were not simply random visions of the mind, but messages, sometimes from God, sometimes from the devil, sometimes from one's own troubled soul. Dream books circulated that promised to interpret what the sleeper had seen. To dream of running water might mean a journey was coming. To dream of fire might mean passion or anger was near. People might wake in the night and ponder their dreams before going back to sleep, wondering what warning or blessing had been sent to them. There is something hauntingly beautiful about the quiet life of a medieval bedroom. The smell of wood smoke hangs in the air, mixed with the faint scent of wool and dried herbs. The only light comes from the banked fire, or the faint glimmer of a rushlight on the table. The house has gone still, except for the occasional creak of timbers or the rustle of someone turning in their sleep. You lie there, under heavy covers, the mattress soft beneath you, the world reduced to this small, warm circle of light and darkness. Outside, the wind sighs at the shutters. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barks, and then all is quiet again. Beds were also places of transition, not just between waking and sleeping, but between life and death. It was common to die in bed, surrounded by family, with prayers whispered for the soul's journey. The bed was where children were born, where the sick were nursed, where lovers whispered to one another. It held almost the whole story of life. Perhaps that is why beds were so carefully made and so closely guarded. They were not just furniture but companions, witnesses to everything from laughter to grief. In larger households, the bedchamber might have held its own small rituals. A servant might come in to warm the bed with a pan of coals, a luxury that kept the sheets from feeling icy in winter. Some beds had ropes that needed to be tightened from time to time. Hence the old phrase, "sleep tight." A loose bedrope meant a sagging mattress, a poor night's sleep, and possibly a bad back in the morning. The bed was cared for like a living thing. Its linens washed, its straw changed, its ropes pulled taut. It is easy to imagine the sense of relief that came with climbing into bed at last. After a day of hard labour, the straw crunched softly as you settled in, the blanket heavy over you. Perhaps you said a prayer, perhaps you simply sighed, listening to the breathing of those around you. The bed curtains swayed slightly as a breeze moved through the room, but you were safe within your little enclosure. The fire dimmed to a faint red glow. Sleep crept in slowly, like a tide rising on the shore, and soon the world of the waking was gone, leaving only dreams and the deep quiet of the night. When morning came, the bed became a place of slow rising. There was no alarm clock to jolt you awake, only the light creeping through the cracks in the shutters, the sounds of animals stirring, the faint smell of smoke as someone rekindled the fire. People often lingered in bed for a while, speaking softly, saying their prayers, or just enjoying the warmth before stepping out into the cold air. The bed was a place you left reluctantly, knowing that the day would be long and filled with work. In a way, the medieval bed reminds us that sleeping was not merely an interruption of life, but an essential part of it, a time of closeness, of reflection, of mystery, and perhaps, if we imagine ourselves lying in such a bed, we can feel a little of what it was like to surrender each night to the darkness, trusting that morning would come again, and that the bed would still be there, waiting like a faithful companion. When the last ember in the hearth has been banked and the house lies wrapped in silence, something stirs in the mind. Dreams come, slowly at first, and then all at once a procession of images that have no need for the logic of daylight. For medieval people, dreams were never just idle fancies. They were mysterious messages, glimpses into the invisible world, sometimes comforting, sometimes terrifying. The night was a time when the soul might wander, and what it saw along the way mattered deeply. Dreams were seen as one of the ways God might choose to speak to humankind. The Bible was full of examples: Joseph interpreting Pharaoh's dreams, Daniel reading the meaning of a king's vision. Because of this, many took their own dreams seriously, believing that each might contain a warning, a lesson, or a sign of what was to come. To wake from a vivid dream was to wake with a kind of burden. What did it mean? Was it simply a shadow of what had been on one's mind, or was it a message meant to be understood? Books were written to help make sense of these visions. Dream manuals, passed from scholar to scholar, offered interpretations that could turn a simple dream into a prophecy. To dream of a tree, one might, read, was a sign of family growth or future fortune. To dream of falling into water might mean a coming misfortune, or even a warning of illness. A dream of losing teeth was taken seriously for some. It meant the death of a loved one, a sign of grief soon to come. These interpretations were not seen as superstitions, but as a kind of hidden wisdom, a way of reading the messages hidden in sleep. The strangeness of dreams was often emphasized. People knew that what they saw in dreams could be strange and unsettling, flying through the air, speaking to the dead, visiting distant lands they had never seen while awake. The dreamer might wake with a start, the images still clinging to their mind, and wonder what had truly happened during those hours. Some believed that the soul actually left the body during sleep, wandering in spirit form to see the things it later dreamed about. This is why, some said, a person should not be woken suddenly. The soul might not have had time to return to the body, leaving the sleeper confused or even harmed. Dreams could be troubling, even frightening. Nightmares were seen as more than just an overactive imagination. They could be attacks by demons or the restless dead. There were tales of spirits who sat on the chest of a sleeping person, pressing the breath out of them. These stories may sound familiar, for today we know of sleep paralysis, that eerie feeling of being awake but unable to move. For a medieval sleeper, though, such an experience might mean that a witch had paid them a visit, or that some evil spirit had tried to steal their soul. Charms were used to keep such nightmares away: prayers before bed, sprigs of herbs hung near the bedposts, and crosses drawn in the ashes of the hearth. There were also dreams that were eagerly welcomed. A dream of bright light, of joyful music, of seeing saints or angels, was seen as a good sign, proof that God had looked kindly on the dreamer. Such visions might be shared with a priest, who could help to discern whether they meant a special calling or blessing. In monasteries, where dreams were considered part of a monk's spiritual life, some were written down, carefully recorded so that they might guide the community. A dream that foretold famine or plague could be taken as a warning to pray, fast, or perform acts of charity in hopes of averting the disaster. Dreams could even influence decisions. If a person had to make a difficult choice, they might sleep on it and see what their dreams revealed. Some would even perform small rituals before bed to invite meaningful dreams, reciting a prayer, placing an object under the pillow, or sleeping in a certain position. There was a belief that sleeping on one's right side encouraged peaceful dreams, while lying on the left might produce troubling ones. And then there were dreams of the dead. Many medieval people believed that the departed could appear in dreams, asking for prayers or warning of dangers to come. Such dreams were taken very seriously. If someone dreamed of a dead relative, they might immediately go to church the next day and pay for a mass to be said for the soul of the one who had appeared. It was not considered strange to speak of such dreams openly. They were part of the ongoing relationship between the living and the dead, a reminder that death was not a final separation, but a change of state. It is worth pausing to imagine this world of dream thinking. You lie in bed, the night silent, except for the crackle of a dying fire. Sleep comes slowly, and soon you find yourself in a place you do not know, speaking to someone long gone. When you wake, the dream clings to you like mist, and you feel as though you have truly been somewhere, truly seen someone. You whisper a prayer, perhaps make the sign of the cross, and settle back into the pillows, hoping that the second half of the night will bring gentler visions. Dreams also found their way into medicine. Some physicians believed that dreams could be used to diagnose illness. If a patient reported dreams of water or drowning, it might be seen as a sign that the body held too much phlegm. A dream of fire might indicate an excess of bile. The physician would consider these reports alongside other symptoms, treating the dream as a clue to what was happening inside the body. Even love and courtship were not untouched by dreams. A dream of a certain person might be taken as a sign that a match was fated. There were charms that promised to let one see one's future spouse in a dream. A young woman might eat a hard-boiled egg, shell and all, before bed, or place a sprig of rosemary under her pillow, hoping to dream of the man she would one day marry. The next morning, she might tell her friends what she had seen, laughing or blushing as they speculated about what it meant. Dreams were, in a way, a shared experience. People spoke of them over breakfast, comparing what they had seen, wondering whether the visions were personal or meant for the community. They were part of the rhythm of life, another way the night connected to the day, and though many of these beliefs might seem strange to us now, they tell us something important about how medieval people saw the world. To them, nothing was meaningless. Even the silent, secret hours of the night were full of meaning, full of messages waiting to be understood. Perhaps this is why we still find dreams so haunting. They are one of the few things that connect us directly to our medieval ancestors. We may no longer believe that a dream of losing teeth foretells a death, or that a nightmare means a demon has sat upon our chest, but we still wake sometimes with the feeling that what we saw in the night was important, that it mattered somehow. And maybe it does. Maybe the night still holds its messages waiting for us to listen. Night was not just a time for rest in the medieval imagination. It was also a time of moral danger. To close one's eyes was to let down one's guard, to open the door to temptation. Medieval people lived in a world where the spiritual and the physical were closely intertwined, where the state of one's soul was thought to be reflected in everything, in health, in fortune, in dreams. Sleep, though necessary, was a vulnerable state. It was when the body and mind were most defenseless, and therefore, some believed, when the devil might be most active. Preachers warned their congregations that idleness was a sin, and too much sleep was a kind of idleness. To lie in bed too long was to give in to sloth, one of the 7 deadly sins. Monastic rules were very strict about this. In some monasteries, bells rang in the middle of the night to wake the brothers for prayer, forcing them to rise from their warm beds and walk through the cold cloisters to the chapel. The idea was not simply to keep them from sleeping too much, but to teach them discipline, to remind them that sleep was a gift, not a right, and should not be indulged in to excess. Even outside the monastery, people were taught that rising early was a sign of virtue. The morning hours were said to be the best for prayer, when the world was still quiet and the soul could focus on God. To sleep past sunrise was to miss this opportunity, and some feared that it marked a person as lazy or careless. Sermons sometimes use sleep as a metaphor for spiritual danger. Those who slept too long were likened to those who ignored the state of their souls, lulled into a false sense of security while death drew near. But there was also another layer of fear: what might happen while one slept. People believed that sins committed in dreams could still endanger the soul. A sinful dream, especially one of lust, was troubling, and many confessed such dreams to their priests, asking whether they had been guilty in their hearts, even if their bodies had been asleep. Confessors often reassured them that an unbidden dream was not a sin, but the very need to ask shows how seriously dreams were taken. There were prayers specifically meant to protect sleepers from sin. Some recommended reciting the Pater Noster, the Lord's Prayer, before bed, or saying a short confession of faith so that if one died in the night, the soul would be ready to meet God. Others advised making the sign of the cross over the bed, or sprinkling holy water on the sheets. Sleep was imagined almost as a little death, a rehearsal for the final sleep, and so it was important to enter it in a state of grace. And yet, for all these warnings, the bed was also a place where sin was quietly present. Marital beds were blessed, but they were also the setting for temptation. Preachers warned against gluttony, lust, and laziness, sins they feared were most likely to take root in the quiet hours of the night. Even oversleeping was considered dangerous, as it left too much time for dreams and idle thoughts. There are records of sermons reminding listeners that demons could use the night hours to plant wicked suggestions in the mind, making us sleep awake with strange or shameful thoughts. There were also more unsettling ideas about what might happen to a soul that strayed too far in sleep. Some believed that witches or spirits could attack a person in their sleep, causing illness or leading them into sin. The night hag was a common figure in folklore, a being who would sit on the sleeper's chest, causing nightmares or even death. In some traditions, this was seen not just as a frightening experience, but as a moral warning, a sign that the dreamer needed to cleanse their soul. And then there were the rare but powerful accounts of people who claimed to have had visions of hell or purgatory while they slept, journeys into the afterlife that left them shaken when they woke. These visions might describe souls suffering in fire or wandering in cold, lonely places, crying out for prayers. To dream all of such things was considered a serious message. A person might vow to live more piously, to give alms, or to make a pilgrimage in response to what they had seen. The church, of course, encouraged people to see their sleep as part of their spiritual life. Manuals of confession included questions about whether one had prayed before bed, whether one had risen promptly in the morning, whether one had wasted time lying awake idly. Sleep was to be used well to restore the body so that the soul could better serve God the next day. Even the division of the night into 2 sleeps, with a waking period in the middle, could be seen as an opportunity to rise and say prayers before lying down again. There was a tenderness to some of these practices, despite the warnings. Parents might teach children to say a bedtime prayer: "If I should die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take." Words that acknowledged both the fear and the hope that sleep carried with it. The child would cross themselves, climb into bed, and trust that they would wake in the morning. And if they did not, the prayer was meant to ensure that their soul would be safe. One can almost imagine the quiet interior of a medieval house at night. A mother whispers a prayer over her children before pulling the blanket up to their chins. A man sits at the edge of the bed for a moment, tracing a cross on his chest before lying down. The fire is dimmed, the room grows still, and the household gives itself over to the night, hoping that no evil will trouble their dreams. There is something both sobering and strangely comforting about this view of sleep. To treat each night as a small preparation for death, To see each morning as a kind of resurrection is to live with a constant awareness of the soul's journey. It is a way of remembering that life is fragile, that the night is long, and that the day is a gift not to be wasted. And perhaps this is the deeper lesson hidden in these beliefs about sleep and sin. In a world without electric lights or alarms, where the night was truly dark and silent, each hour carried more weight. To wake in the middle of the night and hear only the faint breathing of those nearby was to be reminded of one's own smallness, one's own dependence on mercy. The darkness invited reflection. The quiet made it easier to hear the whisper of conscience. Today, we rarely think of sleep in this way. We fall into bed exhausted, we wake with an alarm, we think of dreams as curiosities rather than warnings. But if we pause, if we think about how our ancestors approached the night, we might find something to learn. Perhaps there is a kind of wisdom in treating the hours of sleep as sacred, as a time when the soul, like the body, can be renewed and when it can be protected from the dangers that still, even now, creep through the mind after dark. When night fully claimed the medieval world, it was not only darkness that filled the streets and fields. People believed that visitors moved through the night, some human, some not. In the quiet of a rural village, after the last hearth fire was banked and the doors barred, one might imagine the creak of a cart in the distance, the shuffle of hooves on a lonely road, or the sound of an owl echoing from the forest's edge. But beyond these ordinary noises lay a deeper fear, that the night might hold guests who came uninvited. Medieval people lived in a world where the line between the natural and supernatural was thin, especially after sunset. The hours of darkness were thought to belong, in part, to spirits and demons who preferred to avoid the light. It was not uncommon for a household to say a brief blessing before bed, not just to protect themselves from sickness or sudden death, but to keep away anything that might creep in under the door or press its weight on their chest while they slept. One of the most persistent fears was of the mare, the creature from which we get the word nightmare. This was not a horse, though the word is related, but a spirit said to sit on a sleeper's chest and bring terrible dreams. In some regions, she was imagined as a thin, pale woman with tangled hair, slipping through keyholes or cracks in the wall. In others, she was more of a shadow, formless, heavy, but suffocatingly present. People woke from these episodes gasping for air, feeling as though something had been sitting on them. Today, we might call this sleep paralysis, but to a medieval sleeper, it was proof that a demon or restless spirit had paid a visit. There were charms against the nightmare. Some people placed iron objects under their pillows, since iron was believed to repel evil spirits. Others drew protective symbols near the bed, or recited specific prayers meant to banish nightmares. In the Scandinavian tradition, one might even tie a knife to the bedpost, point facing outward, to frighten away the spirit. It was a quiet form of resistance against the unseen world, done not with loud rituals, but with small, careful acts performed in the dim light of the fire. And the mare was not the only visitor thought to come by night. The incubus and succubus, male and female demons, were believed to tempt sleepers into sinful dreams. They were said to take human form, beautiful or terrible, and to draw the soul toward lust while the body lay helpless. Such stories are found in many medieval texts, sometimes with warnings about how to avoid such encounters. Priests might advise sprinkling holy water on the bed or keeping a crucifix nearby. To some, these demons were more than folklore. They explained the strange and sometimes disturbing experiences that came in the privacy of the night. But not all night visitors were thought to be evil. There are accounts of saints appearing to the faithful in dreams, offering comfort or guidance. The dreamer might wake with tears of joy, believing they had been given a glimpse of the divine. In this, way. The night was not just a time of danger, but also of possibility, a time when the boundaries between heaven and earth might briefly grow thin. Still, there was a constant caution. The same dream that might be a divine message could also be a trick of the devil. Manuals of confession sometimes asked whether the penitent had placed too much trust in dreams or visions, warning that demons could appear in the guise of angels. The sleeper was left to wonder whether the visitor who came in the night was a friend or foe. Folklore also told of witches who travelled at night, either in spirit or in body, to meet with others in secret gatherings. Some said they rode on animals, others that they flew through the air. These ideas would become more elaborate in later centuries, but even in the Middle Ages, there was a sense that the night belonged partly to those who wished harm. The fear of such visitors was enough that some people placed protective herbs near their doorways or whispered blessings before lying down, trusting that their house would be guarded until morning. There are curious records of people sleeping with a small light burning through the night. This was not only for practical purposes, though it helped them find their way if they woke, it was also spiritual. Light, no matter how small, was thought to keep away dark forces. A candle flame flickering in the corner of the room might reassure a restless sleeper that the shadows around them were only shadows, not something more sinister. Some of the strangest beliefs concerned wandering souls, those of the recently dead who had not yet found rest. These souls, it was said, might come knocking at the window, asking for prayers. To dream of a dead relative was sometimes taken as a request for masses to be said on their behalf. To shorten their time in purgatory, people might leave a little food or drink out overnight, just in case a passing soul or spirit needed refreshment. To our modern eyes, this might seem quaint, but to them it was an act of kindness, a way of helping the unseen pass through the darkness in peace. Night demons were also associated with illness. If a child woke crying or a person fell sick for no apparent reason, some might whisper that something had ridden them during the night. The language of riding appears again and again, as though the sleeper was a horse, and something unseen had used their body as transport. This image, unsettling as it is, reflects the feeling of helplessness that comes from waking after a night of troubled dreams. And yet, there is something strangely intimate about these fears. They suggest a world where night was not empty, where every rustle of the wind or creak of the rafters might be a sign. Imagine lying in a narrow bed, the house silent, except for the occasional sigh of the wooden beams. You wake in the dark, unsure why, and feel the heavy stillness pressing on you. Was that just a dream, or is there someone or something standing just beyond the edge of the bed? You reach for the little charm tucked under your pillow and wait for your breathing to slow. By morning, the world feels safe again. The sunlight drives away the fears of the night, and most people go about their day without speaking much of what they felt while lying awake. But the memory remains, and that night, the charm will go back under the pillow. The candle will be lit once more. The quiet ritual repeats, night after night, forming a rhythm as familiar as the act of sleeping itself. What is perhaps most fascinating is how these fears connected the sleeper to the wider community. If someone was troubled by nightmares, they might seek out a priest to bless the house, or they might ask neighbours for remedies passed down through generations. Fear of night visitors was not merely personal, it was something shared, part of a collective understanding of the risks that came when darkness fell. In this way, night demons and spirits were not only creatures of fear, but also threads in the social fabric. They reminded people that they were vulnerable and that they depended on one another and on divine protection to make it safely through to dawn. In the quiet of a medieval night, when the fire burned low and the sounds of the day had faded into silence, there was always the chance that someone would wake before they wished. A cough from a child, a restless turn in the bed, or the slow, uneasy rising of a nightmare might bring them back to waking. and when they did, they had a small collection of remedies and charms to help them find peace again. The night was not merely a time for sleep, but also for quiet acts of care, acts meant to soothe the body and keep the soul safe until morning. It is worth imagining what a sleepless night might feel like in a world without clocks, without electricity, and without the constant hum of distant roads. The darkness would be nearly complete, broken only by the faint glow of embers. Time itself would feel slower, stretching out as though the night might last forever. In this stillness, the smallest sound, the pop of the hearth, the sigh of wind under the door, might seem loud. A wakeful mind could wander easily, turning a creak in the rafters into a sign of spirits, or a chill in the room into the touch of something unseen. Medieval people understood this vulnerability, and so they prepared themselves. A charm might be kept close at hand, tucked beneath a pillow, or tied with thread to the bedpost. Such charms were often simple, a scrap of parchment with a psalm written upon it, a tiny cross, or a sprig of a protective herb like rue or vervain. These objects were not merely decorations but quiet companions, meant to guard the sleeper through the night. Herbs held a special place in medieval bedtime remedies. Chamomile was used much as it is today, brewed into a gentle tea to calm the body. Valerian root, too, was thought to bring rest, though its smell was strong and not to every person's liking. Lavender, with its soothing fragrance, might be scattered near the bed or stuffed into a small cloth sachet. These were not luxuries, but practical tools for those who had trouble sleeping or were troubled by fearful dreams. Some cures were stranger. In certain regions, it was believed that placing a piece of bread under the pillow could protect against nightmares, as though the spirit of hunger itself might be appeased by the offering. In other places, an onion was used in the same way, a sharp and rather pungent choice that speaks to a belief that strong-smelling things might drive away spirits. Garlic, of course, was also prized for this purpose, thought to repel not only illness but anything malevolent that might approach the bed. There were also cures that relied on sound. A softly spoken prayer might be repeated like a lullaby, the familiar rhythm lulling the mind back toward rest. Monks recommended certain psalms to recite if one woke from bad dreams, including those that spoke of divine protection and deliverance from fear. These words, murmured into the darkness, could make the room feel less empty, as though one were no longer alone but watched over by something benevolent. Some households kept holy water near the bed. A small bowl of it, blessed by the parish priest, could be used to mark the forehead or to sprinkle around the room if there was fear of a spirit's presence. In the deep of night, when everything felt more fragile, this ritual might be performed quietly and with great care, as though the simple act could cleanse not just the space but also the uneasiness that had settled in the mind. When the problem was not fear but restlessness, other remedies were suggested. A warm drink, perhaps milk sweetened with honey, was thought to soothe the stomach and bring about sleep. Some physicians even advised a warm foot bath before bed, believing that drawing heat downward into the feet would help calm the head. The advice seemed surprisingly gentle, a reminder that even in an age of roughness, there was attention paid to small comforts. But there were also more mysterious cures, some bordering on the magical. Amulets were worn against sleepwalking, made of carved stones or written charms, folded carefully and sewn into tiny pouches. In some regions, people believed that turning one's pillow to the other end of the bed could reset a troubled night, as though changing direction might confuse the spirits that caused the dreams. Others recommended tracing a circle around the bed with a small stick or finger, imagining that the sleeper was now enclosed in a protective space where no harm could enter. There was also a belief that certain words had power when spoken at just the right moment. If one woke from a nightmare, one might whisper the name of a saint 3 times before speaking to anyone else, ensuring that the dream would fade away harmlessly. Some of these whispered words were in Latin, learned from the church. Others were in the old languages of the countryside, passed down by grandmothers who remembered charms older than the written prayers of the priests. For those who suffered from recurring night terrors or sleeplessness, there were pilgrimages to shrines known for healing. A person might bring a piece of clothing or a small token to lay before a saint's relic, asking for peaceful sleep. When they returned home, they might keep a blessed candle by their bedside, lighting it during troubled nights. The soft glow of this sacred flame would have been a comfort, a tiny sun in the darkness, keeping vigil until dawn. Even the arrangement of the bed could be a kind of remedy. Some people believed it was healthier to sleep with one's head facing east, toward the rising sun, and to avoid pointing the feet toward the door, as this was the way a corpse was carried out of the house. Others believed that sleeping in a room with good airflow, away from damp or foul smells, would prevent bad dreams and illnesses that might come with the night air. These ideas may not have been strictly medical, but they reveal a kind of intuitive wisdom about creating a safe, calm sleeping place. It is easy to imagine how all of these cures and rituals might feel on a long, restless night. The sleeper rises quietly, careful not to wake others, and adds a log to the fire so the room is warmed again. They drink a little water or milk, perhaps murmuring a prayer as they do. A hand reaches under the pillow for a charm or symbol, reassuring in its familiarity. Then, with a deep breath, they lie down once more, turning the pillow, settling under the covers, and trusting that the remedies will do their work. What is striking about these practices is not only their variety but their gentleness. There is little sense of confrontation here, no violent attempt to drive out the night. Instead, there is a quiet cooperation with it, an effort to make peace with whatever spirits, dreams, or fears might pass through. Even the strangest remedies, like leaving bread or onions near the bed, carry a tone of offering rather than aggression, as if saying, "I will share a little of what I have, let me rest now in return." The night, for medieval people, was not empty. It was alive with presence, both seen and unseen. Their cures and remedies reflect this belief, offering a glimpse of a world where the sleeper was never truly alone, but surrounded by forces both comforting and threatening. In this world, every herb, prayer, and whispered word was a thread in a fragile web of protection that stretched over the bed until the first light of dawn. And so, night after night, these rituals were repeated. They became part of the rhythm of life, just as natural as eating or working in the fields. Perhaps they did bring peace, if only by giving the mind something steady to hold onto in the dark, and perhaps, in their own way, they worked for in time. The fire would burn low again, the sounds of breathing would settle, and the house would once more fall into deep shared sleep. In the middle of the medieval night, when the first sleep had run its natural course, there was often a time when the household stirred softly. This waking was not alarming, nor was it considered a sign that something was wrong. Instead, it was expected, a familiar part of the rhythm of the night. The first sleep, deep and heavy, was like sinking into a well of rest, but then, quite naturally, the body would rise to the surface again. Eyes would open, and a strange, calm interval would begin. The house was quiet in this hour, quiet in a way that is almost lost to us now. The fire would have burned low, leaving only a soft glow of embers, casting faint red light on the walls. If there were windows, they would be nearly black, the outside world hidden in darkness. The air would be cool, perhaps even cold, but still. This was the time between sleeps, a space where life seemed suspended, where the world waited patiently for dawn. Medieval people used this interval in ways that were both practical and contemplative. Some would rise from bed, adding wood to the fire, or tending to the animals if needed. Others might use the chamber pot or step outside to relieve themselves, breathing in the chill air beneath a sky scattered with stars. There was a sense of quiet companionship with the night, a sense that this was a time to do small, necessary things that could not wait for morning. But this hour was also one of thought and reflection. People might sit quietly by the fire, speaking softly with whoever shared their bed. In a world without electric light, this waking period was gentle, unhurried. Some even prayed or meditated, believing that these middle hours were especially suitable for spiritual practice. Monks, of course, were called to rise for their night offices, chanting psalms in the echoing halls of monasteries. For them, the hours around midnight were sacred, a time when the soul was closer to heaven. For ordinary people, there was still a sense that this hour was different from the rest of the day. It carried a faint edge of mystery, as though the veil between the seen and unseen worlds had thinned. Dreams lingered in the mind, half remembered, mixing with waking thoughts. A person might sit in silence and recall a dream that seemed like a message, trying to decide if it had meaning. In some cases, people believed that answers to problems might come most clearly in this interval, when the mind was rested but not yet fully engaged with the burdens of daylight. There are accounts of couples speaking intimately during this time, discussing family matters or personal worries. In this sense, the hours between sleeps were almost like a secret pocket of time, stolen from the busyness of life. When the first sleep had washed away the day's exhaustion, and before the second sleep claimed them again, there was space to think, to talk, or simply to sit in silence. Some even performed quiet tasks, spinning wool, repairing clothes, or preparing dough for the next day's bread. These were not noisy activities, but soft, rhythmic ones, accompanied by the faint crackle of the hearth. Imagine the gentle sound of a spindle turning, the scent of smoke, and the soft movement of someone working by the faint glow of firelight. The rest of the household might still be sleeping, and the worker was alone with their thoughts, held by the stillness of the hour. But there was also a layer of superstition to this time. Because it fell so deep in the night, some believed that this interval was when spirits were most active. It was said that witches might meet at such an hour, that ghosts might wander, that prayers offered now had special power. In some regions, people avoided speaking certain words during this waking period, fearing they might attract unwanted attention from things that listened in the dark. Others saw this as a time for quiet magic, for whispering charms to protect the house, for tying small knots to ensure good luck, for murmuring the name of a loved one far away. The night between sleeps was intimate, secretive. Whatever was done in this hour felt hidden, tucked safely into the folds of darkness. There was also the curious practice of using this time for divination. Some medieval dream books suggested that if a dream was remembered clearly during the interval between sleeps, it was more likely to be a true vision or omen. People might write it down, if they could write, or tell it to a spouse or companion, fixing it in memory before returning to bed. To dream of water, of animals, of certain colours, all these had specific meanings, and this was the time to ponder them, turning them over slowly in the mind. When the time came to return to bed, there was no great signal, no bell to mark the moment. The body would simply grow heavy again, the mind drowsy, and the second sleep would take hold. This sleep was often lighter, filled with more dreams, as though the mind were now free to wander after its quiet hour of wakefulness. By morning, the household would rise with the sun, refreshed by the two halves of rest that together formed a whole night. What is striking about this practice is its gentleness. Modern people often feel anxious if they wake in the night, worrying that something is wrong or that they will not function the next day. But for medieval people, this waking was natural. It was not something to fight, but something to accept, even to use. They did not try to force themselves back to sleep immediately, but allowed the hour to unfold at its own pace. There is something soothing about this idea that the night need not be a single, unbroken block of unconsciousness, but can have its own rhythm, its own pauses. It turns a restless moment into a space for reflection, a reminder that wakefulness can be as much a part of rest as sleep itself. One can imagine the comfort of this pattern, the first deep sleep like sinking into darkness, the gentle rising to consciousness like coming to the surface of a still pond, the quiet hour spent by the embers or under a blanket, and then the second sleep carrying one back into dreams until morning. It is almost like breathing, the night expanding and contracting around this central pause. And perhaps there is something we can learn from this practice, to rise in the night without fear, to let the mind wander gently, to pray or think, or simply sit with the stillness. It is a kind of rest all its own. When at last the second sleep comes, it is like a gift, not something demanded, but something welcomed. And when morning comes, bringing light back into the world, it feels as though the whole night has been lived through fully, not simply passed over in unconsciousness. There comes a time near the end of every night when the darkness begins to loosen its grip. It is almost imperceptible at first, just a softening of the blackness in the room, a faint sense that the shadows are not quite as deep as they were. For the medieval sleeper, this was a familiar moment, the quiet herald of morning. The second sleep was often ending now, the body stretching lightly under the covers, the mind drifting toward wakefulness. Outside, the world was stirring. Roosters were among the first to announce the day, their cries echoing across fields and villages. The sound was not jarring but rhythmic, repeating in the stillness until it was clear that the night had truly passed. Dogs might bark once or twice, sheep shuffle in their pens, and a traveller on the road might take advantage of the early hour to begin a long journey before the heat of the day. Inside the home, the fire was nothing more than ash and glowing embers, needing to be coaxed back to life. Someone would rise quietly, adding twigs and a log until flames flickered again, sending their light against the low ceiling and warming the chill air. The faint smell of smoke filled the room, mixing with the dampness of the night that still clung to the walls. It was a moment of transition, the house waking up along with its inhabitants. The bed, once a small sanctuary from the cold and the fears of the night, now felt warm enough to linger in. Children might roll over, burying themselves in the blankets for a few last moments of rest, while adults prepared themselves to meet the day. In some houses, there was a small morning prayer said before leaving the bed, thanking God for protection through the night and asking for blessing on the coming day. This moment was both gratitude and relief, for to wake in the morning was to be reassured that nothing terrible had happened during those vulnerable hours of sleep. Stepping outside into the first light of dawn was an experience in itself. The ground might still be damp with dew, the grass cool against bare feet. The air was crisp, carrying the scents of earth, wood smoke, and sometimes the faint sweetness of blooming plants, if it was spring or summer. The sky would be pale, washed with grey or streaked with pink and gold, depending on the season. Birds began their songs, not all at once, but one by one, until the air was filled with sound. This was the hour when life resumed, slowly and without haste. Cows were led to pasture, bread dough that had been set the night before was placed near the fire to rise, and water was drawn from the well for washing. The village would come alive in soft stages, a cart rolling past, someone calling to a neighbour, the steady ring of a blacksmith's hammer beginning its work. It was not a loud awakening but a gentle one, as though the entire world was stretching after a long and peaceful sleep. But there was more to dawn than just routine. To medieval people, this time had its own meaning. It was believed that sunrise was a holy moment, a time when the world was renewed. Monks and nuns rose to chant their morning prayers at first light, believing that greeting the day in worship brought special grace. Farmers might pause for a brief prayer as well, crossing themselves before beginning work. Dawn was not simply the end of night, it was the return of life, the world's rebirth from darkness. There were curious beliefs about this hour too. Some thought that dew collected at dawn had special healing properties, especially on certain feast days. People might rise early to walk barefoot through the grass, letting the moisture cling to their skin in hopes of curing ailments or ensuring good health. Others believed that certain plants gathered at dawn were more powerful, their virtues strengthened by the meeting of night and day. It was also said that some spirits, those who wandered at night, would flee at the first touch of sunlight. The world was safest now, bathed in light, and whatever had troubled the sleeper's dreams would vanish. In this way, dawn was almost a charm in itself, banishing fears that had seemed so real in the hours of darkness. The second sleep left behind its traces, dreams that might be remembered more vividly now. A dream of clear water might be taken as a good sign, one of good fortune or health. A dream of fire might be a warning, a call to be careful in the days ahead. If the dream felt especially important, it might be told to others later that morning, shared over bread and ale by the fire. There was comfort in these morning rituals, in the familiarity of them. They framed the night as something whole and complete, sunset to sunrise, fear to safety, silence to sound. The day might bring work, challenge, or even danger, but for this brief time at dawn, there was peace. The household was together, the roof still overhead, the world continuing as it always had. And then, as the sun climbed higher, the spell was broken. The soft grey of dawn gave way to full daylight, and the village became busy. The rhythm of the day began again, with its clatter, its labour, its voices. The night, with all its mysteries, receded into memory. Perhaps this is what made medieval sleep so rich, so carefully tended with prayers, remedies and rituals. It was not simply a pause in life, but a journey through darkness to light, a passage that required both caution and reverence. To wake in the morning was not taken for granted. It was celebrated in small, quiet ways that reminded everyone that life itself was a gift renewed each day. And so, as we leave this world of medieval nights, we can imagine lying back once more in that narrow bed, pulling the covers close as the last star fades from the sky. The night has done its work. It has carried us through dreams, through stillness, through moments of fear and moments of peace. The world is ready to rise again, and we are ready to rise with it, but not yet. For just a moment longer, we can linger in this gentle place between sleep and waking. Good night.